working in Department of Computer Science and Engineering of Dr.M.G.R Educational Research Institute. A warm welcome to all the participants who are here for attending the third day of 7 days online FDP on challenges in cybercrime and enforcement of cybersecurity. So in this record, I would like to call Mr. P. Dinesh Kumar, Additional HOD, Department of Computer Science and Engineering of Dr.M.G.R Educational and Research Institute to present the welcome address. Please, sir.
Thank you. Yes, good afternoon, one and all present here. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of Department of CSE, Dr.M.G.R Educational and Research Institute for the third day of online faculty development program on challenges in cybercrime and enforcement of cybersecurity. I would like to thank our respected President, Engineer A.K. Arun Kumar, Vice Chancellor Dr. S. Vijayakumar Madam, Registrar Dr. Palnivelu, Joint Registrar Dr. Sridhar, and Dean ENT Dr. Maduravoyal for their continuous support to perform this kind of FDP. I would like to welcome guest speaker of the day, dynamic personality, Mr.A. Vijayakumar, Director IT and Compliance, Vivardhana Microfinance Limited, Chennai. He is a well-known person for cyber security. Sir, I wish to thank you very much for being with us today to share your valuable knowledge. I would like to extend a hearty welcome to all the participants and faculty members for the third day of 7-day online FDP program. Today's title is Fraud-Related Fraud, High Impact Incident. Along with our faculty team, once again, I welcome you all for this knowledge sharing event. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, I would like to call Mr. Syed Ali, Assistant Professor, Department of Computer Science and Engineering of Dr.M.G.R Education Research Institute, to give the introduction about today's speaker, Mr. A. Vijayakumar. Please, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, all. I am Syed Ali, Assistant Professor, Department of CSE, Dr.M.G.R Educational Research Institute. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the resource person for this day, Mr. Vijayakumar. Mr. Vijayakumar holds the master degree in IIT Madras, and he is certified information system auditor, and he is certified in information security manager, and certified in information system security professional, and certified in risk and information system control, and certificates of Indian Institute of Banking and Finance in Trade Finance, AML, and KYC, and IT security. His service include various executive positions over the 3 decades of the years. He is currently associated with Vivardhana Microfinance Limited as a Director, IT and Compliance. He was worked as a Chief Information Officer at the Bank of Bhutan during the period of 2017. He serviced as AGM Data Center at the Karur Vysya Bank, Chennai. The major achievements have been documenting and revamping the production of data center with a minimal downtime. He was implementing the e-commerce and mobile banking solution. He worked with Bharat Overseas Bank Limited, Chennai, as the head of the IT department of bank during the period of 2016. The major achievement was selecting and implementing the FlexCube core banking solution in all the branches. He worked earlier with the software company HCL Technology Limited, Chennai, as consulting banking, providing the domain expertise to banking-related project. He was worked as a professional officer at the State Bank of India. He served in various capacities in both operational banking and administrative assignments, and then IT-related assignments in the different offices across the country. Then implementing a greenfield total branch automation project for banking Bhutan, the managing the data processing center at Chennai. He was teaching assignments at SBI exclusive for IT Training Institute. He is also a member of the following professional bodies. He is associated with the ISA and CA Chennai chapter since 2001. He have held the post of Director for the Programs and Director for the Academic Relation and the presidents. He is also a life member for the Computer Society of India. He is currently guest faculty for IST Chennai and for the programs at LIBA Chennai. Information Security and Digital Forensics course at Dr.M.G.R University, Maduravoyal, Chennai. MSc for Cyber Forensics and Information Security at the Department of Criminology, University of Madras, Chennai. He is also have been guest faculty for RBI Staff College, Chennai, the Regional Training Institute, the Institute of Chartered Accounts of India, the Department of Criminology, University of Madras. On the whole, Mr. Vijayakumar is a perfect combination of the knowledge and experience and skill. This evening, we are privileged to listen to him on the behalf of all the participants. I welcome you, sir.
Thank
With
you,
great
Syed.
pleasure. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Syed, sir. So now is the time to hand over the mic to our speaker today, Mr.A. Vijayakumar, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, madam, and thank you for the generous introduction. Today's session, we are going to talk about some of the high-impact card cases and what we learn from them. I'll use a PowerPoint presentation, so probably most of you should be able to see. I have tried to keep the graphics to the minimum so that the screen loading is not a problem, even if you have a very low-speed connection and all. So let me share my screen with you, and then we can talk about the subject. Yeah, is the screen visible now?
Yeah, it's getting ready, sir.
Great. Okay, fine. We'll start with this. This will be the broad structure. Okay, fine. This will be the main discussion points. I would like to spend some time about what is this session about, the focus of this session, because I don't intend going into dissecting all the cases which happened, going into those technical details. I would rather be focusing on some limited aspects of that. So that's why I'd like to spend some time on that. Then I'd like to give a quick overview of the cards, some of the basic principles. It will not go into too much of depth about it, just to have so that make sure that all of us understand the terms we are going to use in the subsequent sessions. Then we'll come to the core topic, the sample incidents. I've selected some incidents, some 3 incidents I have selected. We'll discuss what happened in those incidents, and then finally, what are the lessons we learned from those incidents? How do we protect things better and all? Although I have put in the Q&A session at the end, you are free to raise questions at any point of time. We have the next about 1.5 hours to cover the topics there. The focus of this session, let me be very clear, as I said, it's not going to be the technical analysis of all those cases which we are going to discuss. We know that a card transaction involves multiple parties. You and I as cardholders are one of the parties to it. The other stakeholders are the merchants who accept those cards, the issuers, the banks and others who issue those cards to you, the service providers who provide ATM services, who provide payment services, who provide e-commerce services, and the network providers like Visa, Master. Those are the other people in the whole card environment. So when we talk of this incident, we are going to look at it from what can go wrong at the other side. You and I, as normal users of the card, have been through many painful experiences. We read about them and all, but then we don't get to hear about what happens with respect to the other stakeholders. So that is what this session would look at. And then finally, we will see what are the typical mistakes they make and what are the security improvements they should do. That's going to be the focus of this session. So let's start with some brief idea about the cards themselves. Okay, it's just a kind of overview of what cards are, what are the points related to them and all. All cards, irrespective of which bank issues it, irrespective of which country they are issued in, irrespective of which service provider, whether it's Visa, Master, irrespective of all that, they all have the same standard size. In fact, there is an ISO standard. I have given that standard details in the line itself there and all. ISO 7810. In that, there is a description called ID1 that describes how should the cards be physically dimensioned, what size they should have, what kind of properties it should have. All that is given there. The cards traditionally had only a magnetic stripe. Now we have started getting cards with both the magnetic stripe and the chip, a chip embedded in the card. That is also there. We typically use the cards on the ATM, POS machines, internet for e-commerce transactions and all. And cards are issued only by banks. All these cards are backed by what are called as the card networks. Long back, banks issue cards only in their own capacity, but today that is no longer the practice. All the banks issue it with the backing of a card network like Visa, Master, RuPay in our own country, or JCB, Amex. These are the other card network providers who back the banks in issuing those cards. When we say that these are card networks and the banks, they back the banks, what we mean to say is that they set up the basic infrastructure. They tie up with merchants. They set up the networks. They set up processing facilities for settling transactions. All those services they provide. More than that, they provide their logo and then they promote commercially this logo and the services. So that's what they do by that. So by getting tie-up with these banks and the card networks, they make sure that the cards are accepted globally by merchants in all countries. That's what they are trying to do. And when we talk of cards, today we talk of multiple types of cards. We talk of debit cards, credit cards, prepaid cards. Now, basically, all of them have some kind of a account limit set on them, which means that, for example, in a debit card, you can use it only up to what is the balance in your account. In a credit card, you can use it only up to the limit which has been given to you when the card was issued to you. The card bank would have told you that you are having a card limit of 50,000 or 1 lakh, which means you can use the card up to that limit. A prepaid card is where you pay the money beforehand and buy the card from the bank. For example, you want to give a present to someone on his birthday or on a wedding day, then you can use this to do this. You can pay 500 rupees or 1,000 rupees or whatever is the denominations available with the bank and then get a card for that one. Then we also have the limits attached to the card. We have talked about it. Now, this is a broad idea of what the front side of the card looks like. These are the typical features which are available, which is universally. Almost all cards have this. There is a issuing bank's logo, and if it is a combined card, a max stripe plus chip card, you will have a chip embedded on the front side. You have a hologram of Visa or Master, whoever is backing the card. You also have the card number. The card number is usually, mostly it is 16 digits, but you can have anything from about 13 digits to 19 digits. By and large, most of the cards have only 16-digit numbers for that. They follow a specific rule by which the card number is allotted. Then the card network's logo we talked about. There is an expiration date for the card. The card till what date it is valid. So, for example, if it says that in this example, it shows 01/99, which means that this card is valid up to 31st January, the first month of 1999 year. That's it. So the first 2 digits say what is the month, till the last day of that month the card is valid, and the next 2 digits give the year up to which the card is valid. Then you have a card holder's name, which is usually optional. If the person gets a personalized card, the name is given there, otherwise it may not be there. And then you have the chip in there. This is typically the front side of the card. You would also find on, when we talk of the second part, the back of the card usually contains the magnetic strip, right? The black band or the darkish brown band at the top, which is containing the details of the card magnetically encoded on that. There are multiple tracks on that and the information is encoded on that. When the system was first introduced, this had the balances also encoded in that, but today that is no longer required because the cards are processed online with the bank accounting systems. The balances are not stored in that. You have only the card holder's name and the number on that one. Then you have a space for signature. This is again a hangover from the earlier days when the cards were being processed not automatically online but manually. So the signature allowed the card acceptor to verify the identity of the person. Then you have the 3-digit code, which is marked as 123, shown as 123 here. That's what is called as a card security code, or it is called as CVV, card verification value. Some of the some of the companies call it as card verification code. They're different names, but all of them use it for the same purpose, for validating a transaction. And the space below the signature and things is generally used by the bank for its own purpose. It could have some contact information, some instructions for the customer if the card is lost or found, and or it could have some kind of a grid for some verifications, although those are optional. But these three features, the magnetic stripe, the space for signature, and the CVV value, are absolute must for the card. On some cards, for example, the cards issued by Amex, American Express Company, this card verification value is available on the front of the card itself. Just a little above the card number, they give that CV value there also. That's an exception. All others put it only on the back side. Now, when you do a card transaction, typically this is what happens. These are the different phases of a transaction. This is specific to using a card at a POS device in a shop, okay, where you buy things and then you use the card to pay for it. This is how the transaction flows. But then this is broadly the same cycle or the same set of actions happen whether you use it as an ATM or whether you use it for e-commerce or anything, except that the POS device where I have labeled as a POS device, it gets replaced by something else, maybe an ATM or e-commerce payment site and things and all. So typically, the customer uses the card on a POS device. The transaction details are sent to what is called as the acquiring bank, meaning the bank which issued the POS device to the merchant. The merchant, your card might be from, let's say, State Bank of India, but the shop where you are going, let's say one of those big department stores or something like Pothys or Sarvanas where you go, the device is probably from ICICI Bank. So any transaction which they accept on that device in that shop will go to ICICI Bank. That's called the acquiring bank. It is said to be acquiring the transaction. Then they pass it on to the card network, something like Visa or Master or RuPay's Master system. They send it to them if the card does not belong to their own bank. Obviously, you are an SBI card holder. You are using it in a shop which is using a POS machine from ICICI. So the ICICI system would forward the transaction to the card network, to Visa or Master or RuPay or whatever is the card provider. So that system will then redirect it to the actual bank which issued the card, to your bank, namely SBI Bank. So that's how the transaction, and that is where the payment gets authorized. Your PIN gets validated, your transaction gets authenticated, and the amount is debited to your account, and that is where the transaction actually gets completed, and the confirmation flows back in the same path. Broadly, this is how it happens. If you are using an ATM, it's again the same thing. You go and use your SBI card in an ICICI ATM. This is typically what happens, except that instead of a card network, Visa or Master, you would probably be talking of the National Financial Switch, which is coordinating the banks. But this gives us a broad understanding. So for any transaction, you normally have the consumer or the customer or the card holder like you and me. You have the shop where you are using it or the ATM on which you are using it. You have the device, the POS device or the ATM device on which it is used. Then you have an acquiring bank which gets first taste of the transaction. Then you have the cardholders network or the master switch of the country. And then you have the issuing bank. So these are the different parties. So to a particular transaction. This broad picture holds good whatever type of transaction you are talking about. Okay. There are some built-in security features already in the card. One of that we have already seen. We talked of what was called as the card verification value, which was at the back of the card. Then all the traffic which is used in these networks, from the ATM to the bank to the switch, or from the merchant's POS machine to the bank, all those network traffic is always encrypted. Then the card issuers, they have to comply with what is called as a PCI DSS security standard. Maybe we'll talk of this a little bit later towards the end of the session. But for the present, let's simply remember that this is an international standard which is to be followed or to be adopted by all card issuing banks, card people, whoever are handling cards, the merchants, the other service providers, all of them have to comply with this particular standard. Then for transactions, there are PINs or OTPs associated with that. In India, today when you use a card, you require an OTP. Okay. So that for an e-commerce transaction, you require an OTP. When you use it on the ATM, you require a PIN to do that. Then the card networks themselves provide, meaning Visa, Master, all those people, RuPay, they themselves provide additional security solutions. Okay. For example, Visa has implemented something called Verified by Visa, V by V, and MasterCard has introduced something called Secure Code. Similarly, RuPay has also put in a verification process. In all this, the card network provides for the customer to register his card with a particular server and also choose a password for that, so that whenever you do a transaction, the particularly for the e-commerce, when you use the network, use the internet to make a payment, like for purchasing a train ticket or for purchasing an air ticket or for ordering something from Amazon or Flipkart or something, then the system would prompt you for this particular password as an additional layer of security. Then these are some of the basic security features associated with the card. A new feature which is coming up now is the chip. The chip is slowly replacing magnetic stripe. Today in India, as per RBI, all banks have stopped using mag stripes, and they have started using the chip cards now. Chip cards are considered to be more secure. They cannot be copied and things and all, so they are considered to be more secure. These are some of the basic card security features which are today in use. Okay. Now we come to the core of our discussion. We are going to take a few sample incidents and discuss about them. Okay. Let me tell you that these samples are my own selection. It's a subjective selection. It is not that this is something which is recommended by somebody else outside or for some international body or for some academic council or something. It is not. It's something which I have chosen. The purpose of these samples is to illustrate what can go wrong at the other stakeholder side, the card issuer side or for the card acceptor side, or processor side, whatever can go wrong, what can go wrong with them. Now, the sample incidents I have selected basically because, in my opinion, based on my experience, based on whatever I have discussed with people and collected across these days during my working career, these cases were standout cases at the time when they happened, meaning they had some kind of a stunning effect on the people. They involved suddenly huge number of cards, large amounts, and very short time spans. So these are some of the characteristics of these cases. So they kind of were trendsetters at the time when they happened. So it is not to say that nothing big has happened other than these three, or nothing big is not happening and all. It is that, in my opinion, these three cases illustrate something of a transition in the way frauds were happening in relation to cards at the time when they first happened. There are so many cases continuing even today. Some of them follow the same methods, same techniques, and then involve much larger volumes. But then these three cases were some kind of pioneers in the time when they first happened, so that's why I have selected them out. The first case we will be talking about is something which happened in 2012. Okay. I have called it as the ATM cash out incident. All of us normally use an ATM for withdrawing money. We go there, we withdraw 2,000, 5,000, whatever it is that we have, we take it out of there. But then what we are going to talk about is a case where the ATMs were simply bled empty. There were a huge number of transactions done and a lot of money was withdrawn within a very short time. That's what we are going to talk about it. This case happened in 2012 and also spilled over into 2013. So on a timeline, we are looking at a period sometime from about December 2012 to February 2013, during the period when which this incident happened. Actually, although I have clubbed it as one incident, there are two separate incidents which affected two banks based out of Middle East. And they are relating to prepaid cards. Prepaid card, as I explained earlier, is a card where you pay some amount to your bank and get a card, so that you can gift it to someone or you can present it to someone. That's what. So some people bought some prepaid cards from these banks and then they misused it. That is the core of that issue. That is what we are going to talk about. The second case we are going to talk about is something called the Target data breach. Now, Target was one of the big retail chains in US. They suffered a huge data loss. That was sometime towards the end of 2013. Okay, so we are going to talk about that. This was spread over the earlier case, the ATM cash out incident was spread over just 1 or 2 days. In this case, the Target data breach case, it was spread over a much longer time, about 3 weeks or so. It was spread over. So we will talk of that. Okay, the ATM cash out incident. What happened was the bank issued a genuine card and that was misused, and so there was something wrong which happened at the processor end. In the Target data breach case, what happened was the customers were using the cards to pay, and then the data breach happened at the merchant side. The person who accepted the cards at his location, the cards details were breached. So that's what we are going to talk about. The third case is a more recent one, and it is directly linked to India. We are going to talk of a problem which happened with Cosmos Bank. Cosmos Bank is a multi-state cooperative bank. A cooperative bank is normally permitted to operate only within the state, but some of the larger cooperative banks have been permitted by RBI to have their operations in multiple states. So that's why we call them multi-state cooperative banks. So Cosmos Bank is one of them. It's a Pune-based bank and it's over 100 years old, more than 100 years old bank. And they had a major problem and lost a lot of money because their ATM switch got affected with the malware. This is the third case we are going to talk about it. Let me again stress that in each of these cases, we will talk a little bit about what happened, what was the loss, what was some of the very important features that we should take care of, that we should take note of, and then we will talk of what possibly could have been done to prevent this for each of these cases. And finally, based on these discussions, we will come to what are the lessons to be learned for protecting the cards at the higher level. Can we go ahead? Any questions at this point of time?
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir?
Yeah.
Some of the questions are asked by the participants. The first question is there any lines on the particular chip?
Is there any lines?
On the chip, like that, the first question, sir.
No, there is no line. It is like any other your electronic chip which is embedded in that. You would see the connectors and things and all possibly. In some of the cards, you may not even see them. They would be hidden within that. Otherwise, there are no other lines on that.
Okay, sir. The second question, does the card perform any encryption process?
The card as such does not perform any encryption process. If you're using a MagStip card, there is absolutely no encryption at the card level. It is only the ATM or the POS machine or the switch which is handling it. They take care of the encryption. In the case of the chip, what is stored inside the chip, that is encrypted.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. The third question is, how the darknet contributes to the card fraud incident? Darknet.
Okay, fine. The darknet, we are talking of the Tarnet or the underworld, which is which is working in a lot of shady transactions and things and all. There are two ways it happens. Normally, predominantly, the darknet is benefiting by selling card details. Okay, they collect people who manage to collect card details, like the card particulars, like the card number, the holder's name, the validity period, then the PIN number, all that, whatever details they collect for using that card, they bunch them and make them available for sale. That is what is mainly happening in the darknet. So whoever is interested, he can go and buy in small lots. They sell them in small lots, and then the person who purchases that, he uses it for other things, like for example, for withdrawing from ATMs or for doing fraudulent e-commerce transactions. Those things happen. That's how the darknet generally works.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. And only the last question, can you suggest the helpline and recovery methods if we have lost something using this fraudsters?
Okay, that's a big session by itself. But anyway, I'll just give a brief thing. Today in India, there are clear guidelines from RBI how card disputes or fraudulent transactions should be handled. They have issued. So every bank is supposed to have an online way of logging calls or a help desk or a call center for taking calls, or the branch where your account is there, that itself can be a place where you can go and lodge a call. You can lodge the calls online, or you can send an email, or you can send a written letter. The broad idea is that if you bring to the notice of the bank within 3 days of a transaction happening, that it's a fraudulent transaction, then the bank is bound to reimburse the money immediately. You will not suffer any loss. If you do it between 4th day and I think it's 1 week, then you have to bear some small portion of the loss. Okay, some amount. They have set limits for different kinds of account. So probably around 5,000 rupees. Up to that, you will have to bear a loss. And beyond that, it's up to the bank. The banks are supposed to make known their policies, what they will do, how they will reimburse what and all. It depends on that. Broadly, that's it. So if you have a problem, you need to contact your bank's call center or online facility, or go to your nearest branch and give the complaint. If the bank doesn't respond, if you have an issue, then you can take it up with what is called as RBI's ombudsman. Every regional office of RBI has a specific officer called a banking ombudsman who deals with such cases of complaints about banks and banking services. So if your bank has not responded to your problem within 1 month, then you can raise it to ombudsman. That's broadly the structure today available in India.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go ahead. We'll talk of the first case, ATM cash out incident. Now, like I said, a cash out is you take a huge amount of money from a single ATM so that it almost runs dry. That's what we mean by a cash out incident, which means that a single person or a small group of persons are doing continuous transactions very in quick succession, and they take out money. That's what is happening. So this is just to show that what we are talking of is something which had hit the headlines. Okay. It says that this is a global haste, and then it says that it will happen because of hacking into systems in Pune and Bangalore. Now, the bank which is actually affected in this case is in Middle East. They are based out of Middle East, but they were being serviced by two companies in India, one in Pune and one in Bangalore. A company called Electra Card in Pune and a company called N-Stage in Bangalore. These two companies were providing them outsourced services. So their systems got compromised and the bank suffered the loss. So this is just to give the headlines of that, to show that this is something which had hit. Multiple papers had shown this. Now, this summarizes the first incident. It happened on December 2012, 21st December 2012. It affected RAK Bank, Ras Al Khaimah Bank, a Middle East, one of those small countries in the Middle East, and then it affected them. Electra Card was a Pune-based company in India which was providing services for them, which means that these banks were issuing prepaid cards and all the work relating to managing the cards, meaning keeping track of which card is used where, how much money is used, how much money is still left on any card. Because you buy a prepaid card with a certain amount of money. So, for example, if you bought a prepaid card with 5,000, then the company which is providing this service, they are supposed to keep track of out of this 5,000, how much you have used when, what is the balance left, and when is it running out of balance, and after that it cannot be used. So those are the accounting services are provided. The technical and accounting services are provided by Electra Card. The transactions actually hit Electra Card servers, and that is where the transactions are posted there and all. So the total amount involved was 5 million USD. And I would like to draw your attention to the last few lines. How many accounts got compromised? Just 5 accounts, meaning 5 prepaid cards were compromised. And how many transactions? 4,500 transactions that were spread over 20 countries in 3 hours. Within that 3 hours, across 20 countries, 4,500 transactions were done using these 5 prepaid cards. So that is the kind of fraud we are talking about. We'll see what happened a little later, but this broadly what was the fraud which hit RAK Bank. It all involved the prepaid cards. The second one is relating to Bank Muscat, and the Indian partner for them was N-Stage. N-Stage was based out of Bangalore. They were having their operations in Bangalore. In this case, it happened on 19th and 20th February 2013. In fact, there is even a suggestion that the previous case, the RAK Bank case, was kind of a trial run for this bigger case. There just 5 million was the amount of loss. Here you can see it is 40 million US dollars. We are talking of US dollars. 40 million, meaning 4 crores of US dollars were fraudulently withdrawn using, again, prepaid cards. And how many cards were used in this case? We can see just 12 cards in a space of 10 hours across 24 countries. 36,000 transactions were done. Obviously, this involves coordinating with a lot of foot soldiers, meaning people who actually carry the cards to different ATMs and withdraw. So what we are talking of is buying a limited number of cards from the bank in a genuine transaction, and then copying that, giving it to multiple people and using that to make withdrawals. That's what has happened in both the cases. In one case, it was 5 million, here it is 40 million, and then 36,000 transactions over 19th and over 2 days. Or it started in one night and then finished in the next day morning, a pace of 10 hours. Now, typically what happened in this case is that one of the problems with all these cyber frauds is we never get to know the complete details, what exactly happened. Nobody really shares those details. So you get bits and pieces of information from different people, and that's how you generally form a picture of what happened and all. Obviously, the bank people and the service providers, they would know what exactly happened, but then we are not privy to that information. What is supposed to have happened in these two cases is that somebody or some kind of hackers or fraudsters, they bought genuine prepaid cards over the counters of the bank. The cards are genuine. So when they buy the cards, they also get access to the PIN. They are given a PIN for each card, so it's available. Then what they did was they cloned the cards. By cloning the card, what we are saying is you duplicate the cards, which means that you read the magnetic strip, the recording on the magnetic strip, and then you write it onto another card. There are, as far as the systems are concerned, they recognize only the magnetic strip or the chip. They do not go by the color of the card, the picture on that, the design, the name, the number embossed on the card. None of that really matter. As far as the machine is concerned, if that magnetic strip is correct, if it is correctly validated, then it means it's a genuine card. So the process of reading what is on that mag strip, which is generally called as the skimming, and writing it onto another plastic card that's available. The standard size cards are available on the market at low prices. You can buy them right onto those cards. So you take a duplicate of that. The process of duplicating is called cloning the card. So these people took those limited number of genuine cards, and then they cloned a lot of copies of that. They gave it to a number of people in different countries. Then at a preset time, these people were asked to go to the ATMs and then start withdrawing money from each one of them using that same card. Now, one of the things they were identified was that use ATMs which are all adjacent to each other. So in a road, they identified roads where they had huge number of ATMs at very close intervals and used it on them. So the idea was that you could withdraw more money from these ATMs within a short span of time. And so that's how they did that. And at the appointed time, the people who created this fraud or who perpetrated this fraud, they logged into the service providers, the Electra card or the N-Stage, those two companies. Their servers, they logged into them and they removed the limit set on the card. The prepaid card, they would have probably bought with $25 or $50, and then the limit would have been set as $25 and $50, the amount which you actually paid for that. So at the appointed time, these fraudsters, they logged into those systems, connected to those systems, and then removed those limits, which means that they set very high limits on the card. So you originally paid $25 or $50 and got a card, and then now you have from the back end, by getting into the system, removed that limit and made it as a very large amount. So they could withdraw multiple times from different ATMs and large amount of money. Broadly, that's how it was happening. And the beauty of this whole system is that these fraudsters or hackers who were coordinating it, they were monitoring what each foot soldier, what each person who was carrying a card was doing on each machine, how much he is withdrawing, what is the balance available with him and all that, because that is required for later collecting the money from them and then sharing it. Okay. So they were doing that remote monitoring also. So they broke into the systems, removed the limit on the cards, and then they also kept monitoring what those people, when they were using it on the ATM, how much they were actually withdrawing amount. So these two, they were doing broadly, this is how this particular fraud happened on both the systems. Now let's see some of the very interesting facts about this particular thing. As I've been saying that there are too many transactions, 40,000 transactions within 10 hours. So that large transactions within a very short time. So which means that they were continuously visiting ATMs and then doing transactions one after the other. In fact, there are videos which I couldn't upload because of network issues. I thought it might be difficult for you. That shows the person entering an ATM, carrying a bag sack with an empty bag sack, and then finally he comes out of a certain number of ATMs, the bag is full and the guy is really struggling to carry it. So that kind of amount of withdrawals they did from them. Then it was, these withdrawals were all confined to prepaid MasterCards, meaning that the prepaid cards are carrying the MasterCard logo, and that were the cards which were used. Okay. Both the service providers, meaning that N-Stage in Bangalore and Electracard in Pune, both the service providers, they were certified under PCI DSS, meaning they had been assessed for their compliance with the security standards and then found to be complying with all the required security features. So they were certified. In spite of that, this fraud happened there. And the other point of it is that the customers did not get affected. Obviously, if the money had hit some customer's account, then there would have been immediate hue and cry. A lot of customers would have immediately brought it to attention and things and all. That didn't happen because these were prepaid cards. They do not have any customer accounts linked to them. The bank will have an internal account for each card, but then since a lot of these limits were removed and a lot of transactions are happening, actually those accounts became overdrawn accounts and all. These are some of the very key features about this particular fraud. Too many transactions within a short time. Then the agencies were security certified. They were complying with the standards, but then in spite of that, they failed in protecting the cards. And then the accounts got overdrawn and nobody noticed it for quite some time. So what could have possibly been done to prevent this? Okay, there is no way you can prevent somebody from buying a prepaid card. So that's a legitimate business and a legitimate business action. So you can't stop that. And once a customer has got a card, you cannot stop him from what he is doing with it. He can copy that, he can clone that, make copies. None of that can be stopped. Okay. But what the bank could have done, the service agencies could have done is that the transaction monitoring should have been better. Because nowhere can you have too many transactions. Like you can't have transactions one after the other within a few seconds happening, or within adjacent ATMs, the same card being used in adjacent ATMs, same card being used in ATMs across different countries. All those things are not possible. So if they had been actually monitoring the speed with which the transactions were flowing in, the number of times a particular card was used and the number of locations it was used, the volume of transactions, they could have simply found out. What generally happens is that the holiday monitoring during holidays is not as rigid because the monitors also have a reduced strength, and typically that happens. So probably they didn't do it, but then transaction monitoring, if it had been done better, it could have found out. Now the other fact we saw in this was that the systems were breached, meaning the servers of N-Stage and Electracard were breached and some settings were removed. Now we are not sure who did this. Did an employee within the organization do that? Or did someone from outside connected to that and do that? Or did someone from outside collude with somebody from inside and do this? We are not sure of that. But then probably the employee screening processes at these two agencies, if they had been proper, their backgrounds had been checked properly, if they had been their lifestyle had been monitored, then probably it could have been detected earlier, which means that probably a better security audit of the vendors is required. That's the brief cash out case we talked about. Any questions or any doubts on that particular case? Any term requiring explanation?
Sir, one question is there.
Yeah.
Sir, where the hackers store the stolen money and how they can clear the tracks? One participant asked this question.
Okay. See, there is no clearing of the tracks. Probably some entries were deleted, but then there was no clearing of the tracks because the cards were genuine. It was only that. And if you look in the system, the limit is also at the time of transaction genuine because it has been modified by somebody. So there is actually not much of a problem with the card logging, transaction tracking and things and all. But what about the money? The money, like I told you, like it had huge sacks and they were carrying it and things and all, an army of people doing it. So you have those underhand, or what we call in India as the hawala methods for transferring money, from one place to another, from one country to another. And typically the money is used by these drug service providers, and then the whole thing got collected in the Central American countries, Mexico and some other places. In fact, there are videos showing some of those people riding in cars with piles of money sitting next to them or carrying in huge sacks around them and all. And in fact, some clue about the identity itself was found, because in Mexico, one of the persons got murdered, and when the police went to his place, they found huge stacks of money. That's how they really stumbled upon what possibly happened, and they did that. So the physical transport of money was facilitated by this people who handle in these hawala transactions, or people who use for drug trafficking and things. They were the ones who helped it. And then some amount of physical carrying of cash across borders also happens. That's how the money generally gets transported.
Okay, sir. Another one question. How much per day can draw from the card through ATM and other sources like Amazon?
Okay, that depends upon individual banks. Each bank would have set its own limit. Some of the Indian banks, they have set a lower limit. Some of the foreign banks, they have set a higher limit. So you have different kinds of, one limit is on per transaction, because the money comes out of the ATMs. There is a physical limitation, the slot size and things and all. So there is a physical limitation on the number of notes. So they set a limit per transaction. That's why you would find that in some ATMs, they would set it as 10,000 or 15,000 and all. And then they have a per day limit, which means that you can use your ATM card multiple times on the same ATM or on different ATM, but the total withdrawal in a particular day cannot exceed a certain amount. That depends upon the bank and the type of card you hold and all. And then they also set a limit on how much you can use it for POS transactions. So they would have said, so depending on that, that depends on bank to bank and how much they have set.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Fine. We'll go to the next case. We are going to talk of target data breach. We are going to talk, target is, we are talking of a business entity. Target is one of the largest retail chains in US. They have multiple stores across different states. I think over 45 states they have they have the branches. And these branches, they sell various things, just like a huge departmental store. It's a huge retail chain which they have in the US. It's been there for years, and they are known for their size, the kind of goods which they have, the volume of business they do, all that. Now, what happened in this data breach we are going to talk about it. This happened sometime in November 2013. Okay. We do not know for sure when actually the fraudsters or the hackers or whatever you want to call them, they got into the target's systems. Possibly they were active there. Please note the word active, which means that they were probably taking time getting into the system, settling down and setting up things and all that. And then after that, they became active, meaning after that, they started collecting data from that target's systems and all. So that started somewhere around 27th November 2013. And the company was never aware of that. They didn't even know that such a thing was happening. And accidentally or through some complaints and things, they finally discovered that this was happening around 15th December 2013, which means for almost 3 weeks, the hackers had free access to the target system. They had access to every bit of information which they were reading from multiple cards, and they took that. Thus, this case affected over 100 million customers. It was a huge number at that point of time. Today, subsequently, we have had some bigger cases like Marriott hotels and things. They had much larger cases, but then this was a huge number at that point of time. And the amount of data which was exfiltrated, meaning the amount of data which was copied from the target system to an outside system, to the hacker's system, that was about 11 GB. There's a huge volume of data that would have definitely impacted the network bandwidth of the company. Finally, there were a lot of investigations going on and complaints and things and court interventions, and the company agreed to pay a compensation of $18.5 million to the cardholders. That was the last status I know of. I don't know finally how much of it has really been settled or not. So this is what broadly the impact of that particular case. Now, what happened? How did this happen? Just as in the ATM cash out case, we talked of the prepaid card and how that was hacked and all the cloned and all that and all. So here we are going to talk of the methodology used by these particular fraudsters. Now, they hit upon an external service provider, meaning a service provider who was managing some services for Target. Target's core business was running the departmental store. So anything ancillary to that, they were outsourcing it to different vendors. So one of the vendors was managing their HVAC systems, meaning heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. So their server rooms, their offices, their departmental storefronts, all these, whatever ACN things were there, they were being managed by this third-party company. I think the name of the company was Fazio or something, I don't remember. They were providing that service. But this service provider was given remote access to target system. So they could connect remotely. Sitting in their office, the service provider could connect to target network. He could monitor the systems, see what was the status, what was the temperature, which system is down, which system is up, what required to be done to what. All this they could monitor from that. So they had remote access to that. So someone managed to send phishing mails or probably spear phishing mails, meaning a phishing mail is something which goes out to public at large. Whether the email ID exists or not, a huge volume of mails is pumped to all those IDs. Whereas spear phishing is where the mails are sent to specific employees or specific email IDs in a particular organization. That's what you call it. It's a directed phishing. It is directed at specific set of people. So probably phishing mail was sent and someone in the third-party service provider, the HVAC system service provider, he clicked on that phishing mail. He responded to that. He clicked on the link, and as a result, malware got downloaded to his system. They were able to identify this malware as something called Citadel, a variant of Zeus Trojan. Now, Zeus Trojan was one of a classic banking-related malware, which was very popular, which was very widely used in Europe for a long time. It had very special features about that and all. So that was slightly modified, and a variant of that called Citadel got downloaded to the person who clicked on the phishing mail, meaning the employee of that third-party service provider, his system got compromised. It got into that. So this malware was sitting on his system and monitoring what was happening. So obviously, it was able to identify what was the ID and password he was using to connect to the target system. So the credentials were now compromised. The ID, the details required for logging into target network were available or not. So this was used to log into the target network, and then the people, the fraudsters, they did a privilege escalation. If you recollect, in yesterday's session, Mr. Vinod had demonstrated one example of privilege escalation. You remember, he logged into the Windows system as a simple user, and finally he managed to gain the administrator right by using some of the standard features of Windows. That's what you call as privilege escalation. You manage to increase your powers within the system. So using such techniques, these people, when they logged into the Trojan, into the target network, they managed to raise their privileges. So they went to they had higher privileges. And using that, they installed a new malware in all the POS machines. All the POS machines of target system, all the systems were connected to their computer. All the transactions were collected in that. So they went and infected all the POS machines, loaded malware into all of them. So that's how they do. Also, once the malware is loaded, it starts collecting details. So whenever a card is swiped, it reads the card details from the memory and then takes those details and stores them in one of the internal servers of Target itself. One of the internal servers of Target on which they had space. These hackers were storing the data from all these POS machines, the collected data, fraudulently collected data on those POS machines. And then when the file reached the size, it was transferred to the fraudsters' systems during the night. That's how the data was exfiltrated, moved out of it. So you get the malware into the POS machine, then collect the data, temporarily store them on a server within the target company, and then target retail system chain, and then from that move them over to their own system during the night. when the traffic would have been lighter. That's what generally happened in this particular data breach. So using this technique, they managed to get the details of a huge number of customers, as we saw a little while back. Now again, there are very interesting features about this large network traffic. Transferring 11 GB of data, even if it is spread over some time, is a huge amount of data, and then it would definitely affect their operation, network operation. So people should have experienced it, or they should have found out that there is a huge amount of traffic in the night. That is something. And then they were using an anti-malware, but it never found out. They were loaded anti-malware in all their systems. It never found out that the systems were infected or not. The information about how did the hackers manage to get into the third-party service provider and things and all. Interestingly, a lot of information about the technical information about the IT systems of target retail chain were available for free on the internet. In fact, it is said that there is a case study on the Microsoft site about how Target had implemented Microsoft's various products and how it was helping them to improve business. In that, there were a lot of details about the technical systems within Target and how they were implemented. Then they also had, Target had on their own website, they could have a lot of information about what are the third parties they engage for their services and what kind of standards they expect from them, what kind of services they expect from them, what kind of compliances, all these were given in that. So the information required for getting into the network, or what the hacking world is generally called as reconnaissance, that is easily done, and those people could have collected the details that would have helped them to zero down on this HVAC system service provider. So that's how these are some of the interesting factors about this. Now, what could have prevented? The one we talked about is the traffic. Just as in that ATM case, if somebody had monitored the speed and volume of transactions, they could have found out. Here, if somebody had monitored the network properly and seen that during the certain period from that November 15th onwards till about December, the network traffic was high during the nights, that would have given them. And that too, the traffic would have been flowing to unknown IPs. Traffic flowing to their own target's own different servers, or to servers of banks, or to servers of Visa, Master, Amex, those kinds of card network providers. That's all understandable. But traffic flowing to totally unrelated IPs is something which is suspicious, which should have thrown up an alarm, but nobody seemed to do that monitoring. If that had been done better, they could have found out. The next interesting fact is, you remember I mentioned that they were using an anti-malware, but it was not detecting it. It was found out that Target was using a free version of anti-malware. They were not using a licensed version. Like you and me, we download some free antivirus software, load it on our systems at home. They were also doing the same thing, which is not a good practice, because the free versions typically have a lot of limitations on the number of detections they can do, the kind of detections they can do, the kind of security features they bring in. They're all less. Their licensed version would have given them a much bigger security protection. So that's an interesting factor which they had. Then remote access. You remember we said that the third-party service provider was given remote access, and just getting the login credentials, the ID and password was sufficient for the hackers to get into the system, which means that there was no system of two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication in use. When we say two-factor, it means that you use your user ID with the password, the login password that goes with it. In addition to that, you provide an extra credential, something like a number on a token which you have. Something like an RSA token, or some other token which you have. On that ever-changing number is there. So that number you give, or you get an OTP and then you give it to the system. These things this was missing. So it became far easier. If that had been there, it would have been difficult for the external hackers to break into that target network. And obviously, using a VPN connectivity would have helped. But then in this particular case, since the Citadel malware had got into the employee's system, the person who clicked on that phishing mail onto his system, it was having access to what is there in the memory, which is generally in decrypted form. so they could get the password. But still, a VPN connectivity would have improved security. And the third thing which would have prevented is people should not responding to phishing emails. In almost all cases, be it small or big, email compromises or personal identity details stolen, card details stolen, bank information stolen. In all this, it is generally the entry point is a phishing email. Somebody gets a phishing email with a fraudulent link or an attachment, and somebody clicks on them or opens them, and then you end up with a malware. So people, if they had not done that, this problem would never have come up. So that's about that case. So we have seen that how monitoring could have prevented that, how using OTP or a two-factor authentication would have helped in removing that problem, how better training would have helped that and all. So in both the cases, we see that one of the common factors is lack of proper monitoring. In one case, it is monitoring network traffic in this target case. In the cash out case, it was monitoring the transaction volumes and the speed. That monitoring was not there, that did it. Okay. Any questions at this stage, madam?
Sir, yes, sir. Questions are there.
Yeah.
So the first question is, why can't they arrest the people immediately and revert the transaction?
Okay. See, arresting the people, it takes a long time to find out first. Okay, that the company itself took about 3 weeks to find out that it happened. Then they had to get some consultants or forensic experts to analyze their system to identify what happened. Then after that, you have to use that information and try and trace who are the actual perpetrators, which is generally a very difficult task. It takes years to do that, to identify who actually did that and all. But then that takes a lot of time. So that is why we can't really say that the case is fully closed. It will probably, the investigations are continuing, and maybe when they're investigating something else, they might come up with something about this and try to get the people who did that. That is possible. About reversing the transactions, see, probably the reversing of transactions would have been necessary if the customers had come and complained saying that this has happened or not and all, and they were not sure how many. That is why that settlement based on the US court intervention, that the company would pay $18.5 million based on claims from different people. That's how it came in and all. So that would take care of the transaction, because no one is really able to find out which are the genuine transactions and which are really the fraudulent transactions. That's what that's where it stands.
Thank you, sir. The second question, using Google Pay, Paytm, Airtel Money, which is safe, and what are the precautions need to be taken?
I think from a security point of view, they're almost all are on safety or on the same footing. Okay. The only good thing is Google Pay doesn't have a wallet within it. It is linked to your bank account, and that's how you are doing it. So any transaction hits your bank account directly, and you come to know of it immediately. Because today we have in India compulsorily that any transaction, any credit debit in your account has to be sent by an SMS. Has to be, you have to be alerted by it, so you can find out much better. But otherwise, if you are looking at a loss point of view, using a facility with a wallet and not linked to your account is much better, because in a wallet you can keep only a limited amount, and so your loss is limited to that. So till you reload that, you will not be able to use that. So to that extent, your loss can be minimized. So from that point of view, using a wallet-backed facility is better. So it's for the individual to choose which is more comfortable for his style of working and do that.
Okay, sir. Thank you. The next question, how the network finds that high traffic bounce to unknown IP address?
No. The network doesn't find. What typically done is we use tools to monitor the network. We have various tools, simple freeware ones or paid ones like from SolarWinds or something, which keeps monitoring the traffic, which keeps on sampling how much traffic is flowing and what is the pattern, which are the IPs to which it is addressed. Is there any? So that logging or that analysis is what will tell them. You have to actually implement a system to monitor the traffic, which will look at the traffic and then tell you that so much of traffic is flowing per second now, and so much of it, so much percentage is of this particular protocol. HTTP is so much, HTTPS is so much, FTP is so much. It will give that breakup, and it will also say which are the IPs to which it is generally sent. So you will have to use that kind of a monitoring setup to look at it. There you can flag which are the IPs, because you would get these logs going into a system and that will analyze. You can set up saying if traffic to any IPs other than this or that, then you flag it. So that's how you get it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go on.
Yes, sir.
Fine. Okay, the third case, final case we are going to talk about is Cosmos Bank. This is something which happened closer home and it hit the ATM switch of the bank. Before we go on, let me tell you, just give you a quick idea of what an ATM switch is. The different ATMs of a bank, they are all controlled by a central computer, which is called a ATM switch. So that switch runs a special software which monitors all these ATMs, which keeps track of which ATM is up, which ATM is down, which has got how much cash of what denomination. And then the switch also keeps track of what are the cards, valid cards of that particular bank, which card is expired, which card is reported lost, and which are the valid cards, what is the account to which they are linked. All these details are maintained at the switch. So the switch is the heart of the ATM system. Without the switch, the ATMs will not be able to provide you service. So when you try to do a transaction on the ATM, your PIN and the request you made are sent to the ATM switch. The switch is the one which validates your card, making sure that it is a valid card, it's not stopped, it's not reported lost, or what we say hot listed. That's the term we use for a lost card and all. It is not hot listed, that it is not expired, and then it validates your PIN, verifies that you are given the correct PIN. Then it talks to the core banking system, the accounting system of the bank, to make sure you have got enough money in your account, gets your account debited, and then finally it instructs the ATM to give you the money. That's broadly the function of the switch. Let's remember this background. Let's now get into the actual case which happened. Now this again, just as in the cash out case, I showed you the Times of India headlines. Here we are seeing something from another different side. This has really hit the headlines in all the national papers in India. Cosmos Bank falls victim to global ATM cash out fraud. Okay. Let me tell you that this particular fraud involved two phases. There was one part which was involving cards, the debit and credit cards of the bank. There was another part which was affecting the SWIFT system, SWIFT, SWIFT system of the bank. The SWIFT system is something which the banks use for transferring money across borders. So if someone wanted to import something from USA and then wanted to send money to the seller in USA, he would send it through the SWIFT system. He would ask his bank to transfer the money through the SWIFT system to the bank, to the seller's bank in USA. That's how the cross-border remittances are done through SWIFT. It's an acronym for Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. So it's a global network and it is extremely safe. It has been in operation since the mid-1970s till today, and they have evolved with technology, all that. But there has not been a single case of SWIFT system being directly broken in and done till now. And the one part of it involved the SWIFT system. In fact, there are interesting cases about frauds relating to SWIFT, so we will not talk about that. Our discussion is only about the cards. So in this case, we'll talk of only the card-related portion of that fraud. The card-related portion affected the ATM switch of Cosmos Bank. Cosmos Bank, like I told you, is more than 100+ years old bank, multi-state cooperative bank based out of Pune in Maharashtra. This is what is the impact of that particular fraud. Totally 94.42 crores in Indian rupees that was taken out. Almost 100 crores. And the ATM part of it happened across 28 countries, meaning the cards were swept in ATMs across 28 countries within a short period between 11th and 13th August. Between 11th, I think 11th was a Friday if I remember right. So 11th night till 13th morning. That's how it was done. There were 12,000 Visa card transactions and about 2,800 RuPay contracts. RuPay transactions are done using cards issued in India using the RuPay logo. Okay, that's what it is. And Not if you look at the number of accounts as related to the number of transactions, it's less. Only about 450 cards were used, and you would see that it is 450 non-EMV clone cards. When we say EMV cards, it means it is a card with a chip. EMV stands for Europay, Master, Visa. These are the three big card network providers who join together to devise the standards for a chip-based card. So those chip-based cards are usually called as EMV cards. So when you're saying non-EMV cards, it means that the cards did not have a chip, they had only a max stripe. So the clone cards were, the cards, 450 of those max stripe cards were cloned, meaning they were duplicated. The magnetic stripe was red and then they were duplicated, and then that was used to perform transactions. The total ATM withdrawal amounted to 80.5 crores. Out of that, about 61 lakhs was done in India itself. The SWIFT-related fraud was amounting to 13.92 crores. That's how you get the total 94 crores. So we are not going to talk about SWIFT transaction because that is not related to cards. It does not involve any card transaction. So we'll not talk about that. Our discussion is only about the first part, the ATM part, ATM on which these clone cards were used. That's the only thing. Now, again, there's not much investigation. This happened in 2018, and till now, we don't have much details about who did the transactions, who perpetrated this fraud. All that is not known. There is practically very little evidence of that. In fact, towards the end of now 2019, Pune police had managed to arrest a few people based on the CCTV camera footages of transactions done in India. That's about all. Beyond that, nothing could be done. Nobody could be traced. Not even the people who did the frauds could be traced across. Who did the ATM withdrawals could be caught across the world. That has not happened. So there is very little data. So most of it is based on what could have possibly happened. So the general consensus is that there was, like in the case of Target, there was a malware which got into the system, and the possible entry point for this was a phishing email. That is, they feel very strongly that this was a phishing email. I do not have any confirmation about this, but that's a very strong possibility of a phishing mail having been received by somebody in Cosmos Bank, and based on that they got it. And second thing is, it could have possibly been a remote access Trojan also. Okay. I think this is again something which Vinod Sendil had demonstrated yesterday. He had shown us what a remote access Trojan is, rat tool as he called it. I think he demonstrated one. What are the different features in that, what can be done, capturing video images, capturing keystrokes, all that here. So a similar kind of Trojan could have got infected into the system. Or maybe a third-party service provider was the entry point, just as we had in the Target case, the HVAC vendor being the entry point. So similarly, something could have happened here. But possibly in all cases, the first entry point was a phishing mail, and that's the general consensus today. So once they got into that, they did that same techniques probably of getting a privilege escalation and all that. And finally, they planted their malware within the ATM switch. It takes some time. The entry point is the phishing mail, and from there, they have to first download the malware, then start exploring around, slowly increase their privileges, identify what are the systems in the network, try and identify where is the switch, and then get into it. So it takes some time to do that. So they must have entered the network at some point of time and been doing all this for a couple of days or weeks, and then finally reach the switch. And there they implanted or inserted a malware. This malware was something which was capable of imitating the functions of an ATM switch. What the ATM switch did, like identifying if the card is okay, and then verifying the PIN and transferring connecting to the core banking, and doing all those kinds of authorization works, all that this thing could do in a very limited way. They created a switch within a switch, a small switch within that ATM switch of Cosmos Bank. And then they loaded their limited number of cards, that 450 cards which they had cloned. That is, if you remember, that's what I told you in the previous slide. The details of those 450 cards were loaded into this mini switch. So whenever a transaction comes from outside into this ATM switch, the malware would first intercept the transaction which is flowing in and then check it. If it is the card number is one of the cards which is within its database, one of those 450 cards, then it would handle it itself. Otherwise, it will pass on the transaction to the regular ATM switch, and that transaction would get handled in the normal way. So when it is one of those identified cards, the mini ATM switch will not send any message to the core banking system. Instead, it will simply send a confirmation back to the originating system saying that the transaction is valid and it is authorized, it can be paid, which means that the transaction does not hit the customer's account, but a confirmation goes to the ATM originating system saying that the transaction has been approved and can be paid. So the money gets paid out of the system. Okay. So the transaction is honored, money is paid, but the customer's account does not get debited, but instead the bank's account would have got debited and the money is given to the fraudster. That's how it happened. Now again, in this case, which, some of the interesting facts are too many transactions. You saw 28 countries, the same set of cards being used. You can't imagine, even if you travel at lightning speed, it's very difficult to do that. You can't get a transaction done in UK, then suddenly go over to France, and from there jump over to Russia. I mean, it's impossible to do that within the short span of time and do the transaction. So there were too many transactions happening for the same card within a short time, and it is impossible to find for that to really happen in the real world. So which means that if somebody had done a decent monitoring, they would have been able to find out. So that's one of the highlights. Again, in all the cases, you would find that there have been a large number of transactions and monitoring would have helped. The next one is PCI DSS certified issuer, which is Cosmos Bank. Cosmos Bank is the issuer because they issued all the cards. So they are a card issuer. So they got themselves certified under PCI DSS, which is mandatory, which means that their security systems are supposed to be compliant with all the expected requirements, and it's supposed to be strong. So, but unfortunately, it didn't turn out to be so. That's another common factor across. Then the customer accounts are not affected. Obviously, if the customer, just as in the case of that ATM cash out and this one, the customer account doesn't get, if the customer account gets affected, then the customers would have got alerts and then they would have immediately raised all hell. The bank would have been forced to act earlier. That didn't happen. So that is why the debits remained within the bank system and nobody noticed it for a long, till the holidays were over. Okay. The preventive steps, what could have stopped? The first one is very obvious. It's the same. Like I said, it's the theme which repeats across all the three cases. Monitoring of the transactions. If Cosmos Bank had done a decent amount of monitoring, particularly over the weekends and holidays, they would have been able to find out. It would have been easy to find out. Probably the ease with which the malware was inserted shows that some patching was probably not done on the system. Some patches probably on the OS side or the DB side, whatever it is, we are not sure. That patching had probably not been done. Secondly, if they had done periodic sweeping of the system, meaning if they had scanned the system periodically for any malware or any unauthorized program or any new suspicious file, they would have found out. Probably that practice was not there, so that was done. And since we have been saying that the first entry point was most probably a phishing email, obviously the training the staff of the bank on how to respond to phishing emails, how to handle them, how to manage them was probably not there. If this had been done, possibly the losses could have been averted. Okay, do we have any questions on this, madam?
Yes, sir. We have questions, sir.
Yeah.
So the first question is, how EMV adds extra security over magnetic stripe card?
Okay. When you have a chip on the card, the systems are set to recognize only the chip. They will not accept the mag stripe. In the country, for example, in India today, the December 31st, 2000, I think last year December was the deadline for all banks to migrate to that. So if you use a card with a chip, the system will accept only the chip. It will not recognize the mag strip. The mag strip will be accepted only if the chip is not supported in that particular country. So that way you eliminate the possibility of using a cloned card in India. Second one is the chip requires that PIN to be given, and it is not easy to clone a chip. You might put a malware, get the details of the card, meaning the holder, the expiry date, the number, and the CVV value, and you could probably also get the PIN used by the card holder, all that from the memory. But then you would not be able to clone the card because technology has not come to a stage where you can clone a chip so easily. So that doesn't happen. And if you try to use a stolen credit chip card and then you try to brute force that, then the card generally self-destructs. So those are the special security features which go with the chip card.
Okay, sir. The next question. Why the auto reversal takes 3 days to credit the amount if the transaction is failed?
Okay, generally it should happen within about 24 hours. If the transaction can be automatically reversed, it will be done. But in some cases, depending upon which part of the transaction leg got affected, it may not be possible to immediately identify that this is a failed transaction, it should be reversed. So somebody would have to manually intervene, examine the records, and then decide, yes, this has to be reversed. So there could be a delay. Usually it happens within 24 hours, but if there are, depending upon the point at which it failed, it might take a little longer.
Okay, sir. And the last question. What Cosmos Bank 94 crores online fraud says of bank security? Like that one participant asked.
Okay. Now, security is something which is there everywhere. You are talking of Aadhaar, and there are so many complaints of Aadhaar. We are talking of America is supposed to be an advanced country, and there so many things happen. Okay, same kind of fraud. For example, if someone had read about Equifax, Equifax is one of the credit information bureaus in US, meaning they maintain complete details. What we call as in literal Tamil language, we will say them, everyone's jadagam would be there on the system. Anyone who has done a loan transaction, who has approached a bank for a loan, all his details will be available there, which means that his name, address, employment, previous employment, the employment before that, where he studied, what is his driving license, social, national security number, all that, and which are the loans he has got, what, his card details, everything will be available. And almost 120 million of them got compromised, and the company was not even aware of it for months together. So that is something which is actually happening based on the kind of proactive security monitoring which they do, the kind of security setups which they have. Banks do have good security setups. For example, till today, touch wood, we do not have a case of somebody's core banking being broken into and done. We have cases of only ATM skimming, and that too now when we remove all these max threat cards and go into chip card, we are in a much better level of security. So by and large, I would say that there is no, we need not really feel worried about security being lax at their point. Okay. That's the broad message I would like to give. It is not to say that everything is weak. It is to say that people have used special tools to get something out of some systems. That's only it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, let me now come to the final part of our session. We'll take about 10 minutes to finish this. We are going to talk of the important lessons we have learned out of these cases. In all these cases, one of the things which has come out very clearly is that good security tools must be implemented. We saw that in the target case, they were using a free version of an anti-malware. You cannot use a free version for a business enterprise. Critical business operations, you cannot depend upon free version because that has got limited features. They themselves make it clear. The providers themselves make it clear that this is what will be supported, this will not be supported. So you should not do that kind of a mistake. Use full secure products. Then it is better to avoid remote access to vendors. There are some organizations, banks, which follow good practice that when a vendor has to access a system, he goes into one of the bank's branches and does that. If a remote access has to be provided, it has to be backed up by VPN and multi-factor authentication. At least two-factor authentication is a must. More than that is recommended, but probably not very practical. So at least two-factor must be in place. Then we need to have 24/7 monitoring. In all the cases, that's what we saw. When we say monitoring, it means absolute, meticulous monitoring work which has to be done. because when you monitor any transaction, any network traffic, or for that matter anything, 95% of the time it is generally only very routine acceptable transactions, and so you tend to get lazy about it and ignore them. The only 5% of cases which lead to problems is what you tend to overlook. So you need to have definite, absolute, clear monitoring which will treat every transaction same. That is where using automated tools will really help you. You can use AI-based tools, you can use other SIM tools as they call them, to monitor this and then get the abnormal situations. Okay. So you need to look at traffic flowing, unusual volumes, unusual protocols, unusual IPs, or the volumes of transactions, like we talked about credit card. The same card cannot be used multiple times across different locations within a short time. Those kinds of things need to be monitored. Monitoring has to be generally improved, particularly over weekends and holidays. That is when the people today, the fraudsters, expect that monitoring will be lower and they tend to exploit them. Third-party services, when you're engaging, need to be monitored far more closely. Today, a lot of outsourcing is done because they are non-core activities. Somebody who is in retail chain business, his main business is selling items and not maintaining the ACs of things. So outsourcing is part of today's business life, but then monitoring those third parties is something which is absolutely important. You would have definitely signed a service level agreement, an SLA, with all of them, and you would have agreed on certain terms, like what will be the uptime, what will be the downtime, what will be the kind of alerts which will be given, what kind of response time will be there. Those various factors you have put in there. You need to make sure they comply with all that. And you need to make sure how they do enhanced monitoring during holidays, during special sale seasons and all that and all. Then you need to have the person who's giving the outsourced service, like Target or the bank, Cosmos Bank, or the other banks, which the Emirate, the Bank Muscat and Rack Bank, all of them you are using outsourced. So the agency which is giving out the service, which is giving the third party contract, they should make sure they have the right to audit the third party who is providing the service. They should be able to audit, and during the audit, you should be able to verify what are the recruitment practices. Are they checking the background? Are they making sure that people with clean record are coming in? How often do they rotate people? Do they force them to go on vacation? Or if any security incidents are there, how quickly they respond to it, how quickly they report. All these need to be looked in and out. In fact, in short, managing third parties is a big area by itself, and it has to be taken seriously. Then third-party services, when you look at, you should to see how do they monitor their staff, how do they train their staff. You should focus on your own staff, you should focus on their staff, particularly how the staff, both the third parties as well as your own staff, are trained in handling phishing messages. How do you identify a phishing phone call? How do you identify a phishing email? What do you do on that? All these need to be drilled into people, and as often as possible, you should be able to carry out some simulated tests for the people to do that. The basic lesson that we should have in all this is that you can trust your third-party service provider, but always verify. Trust, but always verify is what it should be the actual principle of the organizations. The final most important lesson in all this is that, if you remember, in almost all the cases I was telling you that we do not have exact details about what happened. We can only surmise that this happened. This is circumstantial evidence and all that and all. The reason is that nobody is willing to share the details about them. All of them ask someone to investigate. For example, sometime back, there was a big breach into one of the payment service providers in India called Prism. It is a Chennai-based company. They had, and there was a big hue and cry about it, and then they appointed some consultants to verify and do all this, check all this. But then unfortunately, the reports are never made public, so that the others are not able to know what went wrong and what they should tighten up. Therefore, we need to improve sharing of details, particularly of incidents, to improve security. I think the final, yes, there was a question somewhere in between about chip cards. So let me just give this word of caution. Chip cards do not mean that all your problems will go. The problems of skimming will disappear in India because the chip, the max chip will not be read on your ATM, on your POS machine and all those things. But then The danger of MAC stripes being used when you go to some other country is always there, because not all countries have switched over. Even USA is still in the process of migrating to chip cards. And secondly, the chip card might be safe, but then when a malware gets into that POS machine and then it reads the details from the RAM about the card holder, about the PIN and all that, then it can be misused for carrying out fraudulent e-commerce transactions. So that's one thing which you should be aware of. Because when you do an e-commerce transaction, you only give the details of your card. You do not have an automated machine which is reading the chip on the card. So that danger will still continue. So we should still continue to maintain all the security precautions we talked about, even though we may have full chip cards. I think I would stop with that. Any further questions, madam, on subsequent questions?
Sir, yes, sir. Many
Yeah.
questions are there.
Yeah.
Sir, whether NFC chips are safe?
NFC chips they come under the class of chips, and generally NFC, the range is a few centimeters. So it is generally safe. It's not, unless you really, the guy who wants to use your card, he bumps into you and then he flashes the card reader against that. It's not going to happen. It's not that easy to do that. Second thing is, even if you are that much worried about it, today there are safe card holders available for NFC cards. They provide some kind of a RF shield over the cards, so you can put your cards within that, and it generally becomes more protected. The third one is, there are limitations on the amount of transactions which can be done on the NFC card. And the RBI has stipulated that banks should give the customer the freedom to set that limit. So RBI has set a limit of 2,000. You could probably set it lower also. And many countries have that practice of having a limit on the NFC card. If you use it on the machine, meaning directly insert it on a POS machine or an ATM, that is okay. But where you tap and use, there are limits on the amount for which it can be used. So that precaution is also available.
Okay, sir. The next question is, one participant named Ogo, he asked, the fingerprint-based ATM card.
Yeah.
This is my research, sir. Is this will be applicable? Please convey. Is this will be applicable?
See, there are in India, there are systems which use fingerprints. Okay, but then in general, earlier banks used to issue some cards and then store the fingerprints on a separate system and then use that to validate. And today, some of the payments are done with the fingerprint with the Aadhaar validation. Okay. If you are having a centralized fingerprint repository like that, then using fingerprint authentication is quite easy, simple to implement. But if you are having your own fingerprint database, then giving that freedom of access to that to a customer using his card outside your network in some other bank system or some other country becomes difficult. But otherwise, it's a technically viable solution and it is available in many places. They have implemented in bits and pieces in many places.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. The next question, does the retail shop debit card device is connected to ATM switch, sir?
Okay, that depends upon the kind of volume. Usually, they concentrate all these POS transactions on a concentrator and then route it through the ATM, or they may have a separate switch for that. That purely depends upon the kind of volumes the banks are handling. Otherwise, in smaller banks, it will go through the same switch.
Sir, the next question, how does the data breach affect security?
Data breach arises basically out of security, minimal security or security weaknesses or vulnerabilities. That's how it happens. You may have some patch which is not updated. Like for example, Microsoft had that famous SMB related weakness. If that was not that, if that patch had not been applied on your system, then you have a security hole. You have a vulnerability, and you have the chances of WannaCry getting into your system, the ransomware getting into your system. So the security vulnerability is what leads to a data breach.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. The next question is it possible to lock our card temporarily if I decide and if I can open the other time, or simply lock the card?
Yes, yes. Today that's already required, and in India it is allowed, and most of the banks have implemented it also. You can deactivate, I mean, you can temporarily deactivate your card. They give a particular SMS to do that, or they give a mobile number to do that. So you could send a message, and or through the net, you could temporarily deactivate it and use the same process to reactivate it again. That is done.
Thank you, sir. The next question, the last question, does the card saves any information from the networks
No, no, the card doesn't say anything. If the cards which, like for example, some banks issue what are called as e-passbook, or they call it different names. They are chips which are meant for storing your transactions, but then the transaction-related cards, like your Visa or Mastercard, they do not store anything. They do not store your transaction details or anything on that. They don't do that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Very wonderful session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aishwarya ma'am.
Vijayakumar sir.
Thank you, madam.
Really, it's a wonderful session. Normally, we people used to think, okay, we all have cards, simply we can go and swipe it over there. But you have just made us to understand by swiping itself create a lots of problem. Yes. So before we swipe the card, we have to think of yes whether it's necessary to swipe it now and all. So it's a really eye-opening session for all of us in terms of how we have to safeguard our cards and all.
Yes.
So thank you for your excellent session. Thank you,
madam. In case you want, you can share that PPT. There's no problem with that.
Yes. Last day we thought of thinking we have to share that all the day session PPT to all the participants.
Okay.
So by that time, anyway, the PPT is with us. By getting a permission from your side, we can just share it with all the participants.
Yes, we can do that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the excellent session.
Thank you, madam.
On behalf of Department of Computer Science and Engineering of Dr.M.G.R. Education and Research Institute, it's my privilege to thank all the participants who attended today's session. I would like to thank our today's speaker, Mr.A. Vijayakumar sir, and all the participants. Thank you very much. And for tomorrow's session, day 4, we'll meet by 3:30 p.m. The topic of the session is Risk Management and Cybersecurity by Mr. R. Vittal Raj. He is a risk assurance and consulting expert and trainer, founder partner Kumar and Raj, Chartered Accountant, Chennai. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Bye.